We're going to take a look at CTE monies, how they're generated from the state, how Perkins differs from block grants. We're going to look at the rules for expending monies. Yeah, okay, great. We're also just going to look at the two variances. What are the rules for funding streams and how to keep that straight? So we talked about Perkins yesterday. In a flip way, I said that's little money. It's not typically as much money as you generate for your state block grant, for your minutes per day in CTE electives. What are the rules for Perkins expenditures? We're going to talk a little bit about if there are questions about compliance, if you are making decisions for the year about your Perkins funds, you're developing your budget for your application next year, how can you determine whether what you want to use those monies for will be an acceptable purpose? What's your rule of thumb for making sure you're compliant? There are written resources within the grant which are wonderful, and we should always, just be kind to our TEA staff and be sure we've read those thoroughly before we pick up the phone to ask questions, because a lot of the questions that we might have are often very clearly stated in those guidelines. However, there are some gray areas, or there's an area that might not be spoken to just exactly in terms of your plan or your idea. And so if you're unable to find it in the document, you can give Rebecca a call. She shared her contact information. But TEA has a help desk that they've developed in recent years, and that is a wonderful resource. You can send an email or contact them by phone. And that information was in the handout or the presentation that was covered yesterday, and that'll be available via the live binder before we're finished here with all of this. Now, we talked about the students' attendance accounting handbook and the reports that we turn in PEMS that capture our students' enrollment in CTE and the number of minutes per day that they spend in the CTE classroom, and that report also factors in what kind of attendance the student had and whether or not they were in the classroom served by the certified CTE teacher the whole time, or that report indicates if they were removed from the classroom for more than 5 consecutive days for discipline. Then of course we pull them out and we don't have them on that weighted funding report. We have software systems that capture all this data, but of course you as a CTE administrator will want to verify the accuracy of those reports and check on the kids with that. And then from those reports, our funding is generated from the state level. And on the summary of finance page, how many of you have looked at a summary of finance for your district? Okay. If you're unaware of that, on the TEA website, there are summary of finance reports for every district. You access those reports by entering your county and district number, and it'll pop up and it'll confirm with you what district you're with. And you'll be able to take a look at that. Your business office has a summary of finance report for the district as well. In my district, we always used internal reports in looking at what kind of funding we received and what we were projected to receive during the year, because our internal reports were more accurate to our attendance, our current attendance. The summary of finance reports are also accurate, but they're updated at greater intervals. So if I wanted to know last week for sure what our attendance rate was looking at, we used an internal report. But you can go to the summary of finance and you will see a CTE line. It'll list the number of FTEs that your district generated, your full-time equivalents, which had to do with how many minutes per day your kids were in instruction in CTE, and it'll list a dollar amount on what your district has received or will receive for that portion. And those funds are from the state. There will also be a separate line item on there for the CTE advanced student allotment. And again, that's generally not quite as, is a little bit of money as compared to the larger amount that you'll receive in the state monies. Do the monies allocated for the CTE budget observe the state rules for the amount budgeted? Who can comment on what the state rule is for the state funding? We talked about it yesterday, then we went back and clarified it one more time. Of the line item amount, how much has to be spent on CTE kids? Yeah. 58% or, yes, exactly. At least 58%. You can always spend more, but at least 58% has to be spent directly on CTE students, teacher salaries, equipment, direct instruction kinds of things. Up to 42% can be used for indirect costs. Every new director needs to know who the business office personnel are within their district that will help work with them in managing the funds related to CTE. There may be someone different assigned to Perkins money than assigned to the state-funded amounts. Oftentimes, a district may choose someone to deal with grants in general, and so the Perkins may fall under that category. But you'll want to identify who those folks are. You'll also want to get a clear understanding of what your role with those budgets is going to be and what the expectations of the district are. Every district does things a little bit differently. Some districts ask the director to run and just make it all work. Other districts work constructively or collaboratively with the central office folks in planning and spending the money. It just varies, and so every district needs to have a clear understanding about how that's going to interact and work. And then you'll want to take a look at the enrollment within each of your CTE subprogram areas. If you have ag or marketing or engineering, a STEM program, what's your enrollment? What are the kids, how many kids are being served in those programs? And also, when you're looking at monies and budgets before you come up with final allotments, you want to consider unique expenses of every program. CTE is funded on a weighted basis because there are certain costs with educating students in these programs that are just not typical to standard academic expenses. And it's important when you're planning to consider what those costs are. I will use principles of technology as an example. It's a way that kids could earn physics credit in a CTE elective, and that also counted for science credit, and they took the science exam as well, and the physics exam as well. But there were certain labs that were required with that, and those are, certainly not optional. The kids had to have those lab experiences in order to have that curriculum, so we had to be sure we budgeted for that kind of thing. So consider the instructional area, get dialoguing with your teachers. If you come from a different background, which most of us in the room do, you'll want to have some conversations with folks about their curriculum and take a look at the TEKS and get comfortable with what the expenses are and look at what past expenditures have been. When you want to ask a little bit about how those budgets were developed. Some folks have a very formal budgeting system in different districts, and others have an informal budgeting system. You want to get a sense of what has gone down in the past and then consider where you need to go in the future that will allow you to equip your classrooms and your kids to really wail on that curriculum and do it well, and determine who your key participants are going to be. You can always ask for input from your teachers on what their needs are, have them do a needs assessment of their labs, and I always ask my teachers to give me their requests in 3 categories: what they had to have, what they wish they had, and what they would ask for if additional monies became available. And that allowed me to prioritize more readily. How will the management and expenditures of the CTE budget further the district goals for its students? We always had in Friendswood some major themes we were working on, and oftentimes CTE could support that while we were delivering services to our kids directly. around our CTE curriculum. So if you can, play ball with the larger team goals too, that's always great. Practical reality, know how you can find your budget reports. You don't want to find out in November that they expected you to download those every month and reconcile them. That would be good to know now. So in some situations, they'll send them to you. In others, they expect the budget manager to download those and periodically review them. In my district, I always made sure that outstanding POs were reviewed and paid off or canceled if we weren't going to get it, if something was back ordered, whatever. But I just kept up with the teachers and kept that ball rolling so we could function appropriately and didn't have a whole bunch of encumbered funds at the end of April when we were trying to close out budgets. So just give that some thought. Every district has some thresholds that you need to respect. Have a conversation with your business office about capital outlay and just some of the general rules related to purchasing. Some folks have a purchasing manual. It depends on the size of your district, but everybody has practices, and you want to be sure, especially if this area is new to you, that you have a conversation about that. And just look at, who's reviewing the budgets and how are they, what are their hopes and expectations for in terms of compliance. And then also, how are you going to analyze that 58% has been covered or more and base that. In my district, I was the budget manager, so all of the POs had to be signed off by me, and it was done electronically. Every district has its own practice with respect to that, but just find out who is the budget manager for CTE and how that will be managed just from the PO perspective. It's those nuts and bolts that can kind of trip us up sometimes if something isn't caught correctly. We had a system where the director of technology had to sign off on anything related to computers or software, and the system didn't allow his name and my name to be both in the system the first year that it came out. So we had a manual backup for all that, but it was fine. We just had to be sure the right hand knew what the left hand was doing. Just take a look at your physical mechanics in your district. And then when purchases are made, who needs to be informed? I tell you, when we put in our culinary arts program and I had industrial size, I had a huge vent hood and warmers and ranges and all kinds of large equipment coming in. You can bet that our maintenance department needed to know, so they were there and able to manage that. It had to come in on a special dock, and just be sure the practical realities of whatever you're generating are handled. And consider the time of year when things are coming in too. You do not want to have a large delivery coming when you're closed for the Christmas holidays, or when the person who's in charge of that program is not going to be on campus. You want to consider just some of the practical realities of being sure that information is received and the equipment goods get to where they need to go. The Project Lead the Way software years ago came on a little disc and a software deal. It ended up in the department lead of the English department's box for a month in the summer one time. We had to really dig around and look. But consider when you're ordering it and when you receive it, and be sure you don't have to play hide and seek. And again, just look at that. I reconciled my budgets every month and just made sure our POs were up to date. It just helped me stay on top of it. We're going to take some basic questions first that you might have related to budgets, and then we're going to table talk through some real-life scenarios that are based on things that we've experienced. But any general questions about budget?
Can you repeat again, please, for the summary of finance?
I'd go to the search feature. I'd go to one of two places on TEA's website. If you go to the A to Z index, it's probably listed under Summary of Finance. And then secondly, you can go to the search feature and pull it up that way as well. If I had to go through a more layered process, there's a business finance page, and then you can go into that direction too. But I always kind of went short and sweet on the search feature and had a good experience with it. The website's working really nicely. And I meant to mention earlier, just as a bonus, if you haven't gone to the CTE page on the TEA website, make that something that you do when you get back. It's a wonderful wealth of information. It's got all kinds of layers and curriculum options and just lots and lots and lots of information from both an administrative side and a programmatic side. So, any other questions, just general questions about budget? We're going to talk through these scenarios. You're going to be given at the tables a variety of different scenarios. There are 4 of them, and then one scenario has 5 parts to it. They're all real-life situations that might come up in any given time. I'll ask that each table work through these, and the back of the room, if you would work through the 5 parts of scenario 4 first, and then go to the top, and the front half of the room, if you'll start at scenario 1 and work your way down. We're going to talk through these at your table for about 10 minutes, and we're going to pull them back together and give you some ideal solutions in these scenarios. Okay, folks, we're going to bring it back front and center with the whole group. Let you finish that thought at your table. A couple things. David and I work for 2 districts that weren't too far apart and were somewhat similar in nature, but had some very different practices in our districts about the way our offices were managed. And one of the differences was how formal a process the budgeting was in Friendswood versus Deer Park. And in Friendswood, we had a super formal process, and it lasted, we spent about 4 months developing the budgets for the next year in terms of, we were asked to come up with a very detailed idea of how the monies that we were going to generate would be expended, and then all of that went before the school board, and it was very specific in terms of even including potential vendors, and we always included, information about enrollment and costs and things like that when we looked at it. And then David had quite a different experience. He'll share with you.
Okay, you remember what Carol said, what's said here stays here? This is real important. No, I'm gonna tell you, my predecessor, when I got to Deer Park as an ag teacher, and ag teachers are the most neediest people in the world. They always need a new trailer or a new truck or some scales or clippers or blow dryers or whatever, But we had a brand new ag program. It had been going on a couple years, and we had absolutely no equipment. And I had lived with a budget all my teaching life. You got $1,500 or $2,000. Don't spend it all in one place. When I got to Deer Park, one of my first questions, being a good ag teacher, was, what's my budget? And my CTE director said, well, I really don't do things like that. You just tell me what you need. And I thought, I am going to love this place. And we did build a new ag facility, and we did spend a lot of our money. And as she retired and I took this over, I thought, or tried to take it over, I'll say that. I don't think I could ever fill her shoes, but, I thought, that's working, and I'm just going to see how it works. And I don't do any budgeting. And I know you're sitting there thinking, that would never work in my district. But here's what we found out. If teachers know that you're there and you're going to support them every way you possibly can, they're going to take care of the money. I have very frugal teachers, and when they need something, I get it for them. And I usually end up with money to carry over the next year. And that sounds pretty amazing, but it really works. I know this, when I was teaching, if you gave me a budget of $2,000, how much was I going to spend? By God, I was going to spend. I didn't care if I had 3,000 pencils I had to go buy at the end of the year to finish my budget up. That's what I was going to spend. But when teachers know it's there, and if they ask for it, and if they have a reasonable request, and I think I've turned down one in 11 years, and a teacher wanted a screen printing machine. And I thought, I can't imagine the mess that's going to make. But I said, what are you going to do with it? She said, well, I really don't want it. Another teacher wanted it, so he just wanted me to ask for it. And I said, no, let him come ask for it. Well, he never came and asked for it. So That has worked really, really well for us. I don't spend any time on budgeting. I can promise you that. We get a monthly report from our business office. We do open POs. That helps a lot. That allows the teachers to run to the hardware store, the lumber yard, or the grocery store and pick up whatever they need for their prep and to get them going. And it just works great. Now, I don't know if it would work in every district, but it works in Deer Park. So it makes my life really easy. One thing Ann mentioned earlier was when you buy equipment or if you have big equipment needs, we bought a floral cooler. And I needed to find a floral cooler that didn't need a drain and had an internal, condenser or evaporator. In other words, I wasn't going to set anything on the roof. And I went to our child nutrition department. They hooked me up with their guy they buy all their refrigeration equipment from. And after about 3 months of searching, he found one that fit what I needed. I would have never found it. So, work with other people in your district. But that budget system works really good for me. And I'm glad it does because I wouldn't want to, set up a bunch of budgets, have people run out and get mad at you. So, anyway.
Well, I will say we always work with our folks about finding the needs that they have, finding ways to cover it. But different districts have different approaches for managing that. And you always have to be able to respond to folks who have questions about, how those monies are expended and just, how many kids you're impacting and things like that. So it's good to have that information going on in the back of your head, whether it's a formal or informal process. And I do believe hugely in what David said. If your teachers know that you have their back, that you're going to help them problem solve, that's a huge piece to doing really good things to kids in terms of the impact of the program. The teachers have that sense that you'll work with them, and that was something we always did. If folks needed something that was unanticipated but completely valid, we absolutely got down for it. And we had our education foundation was a great source of funds. If we had something out of the box that couldn't be spent in one, from one stream of money, we could oftentimes call on a special donor to help us manage that kind of thing. Just remember, Perkins money cannot roll over, by the way, when we're talking about monies. That is unique to Perkins, so make yourself a mental note about that. Let's talk about scenario one. Who wants to throw an opinion about scenario one? The superintendent in your district's requested that you cover new student desks for 3 classes in CTE from Perkins. Is that okay? What's the rationale? No furniture, exactly. Yeah. Scenario 2, very good. And I saw a lot of folks who were on board with that, who were clear in that, and mentally clear on that. Scenario 2, in the past, the CTE budget's always funded the English department's computers. Well, you're the ones with all the money, right? You can do that. Gosh, I'd kill for a fund like that. So what are you going to do? No. Yeah, it absolutely, you can't purchase English computers out of CTE funds, period, right?
Well, what has the 58%?
It depends. Okay, that's a great question. I'm so glad you brought that up. In our district, we had the CTE budget that we were responsible for and would be audited on was 58% or 59% of our allotment, whatever. And then, of course, we pulled salaries out of it, and then that was the money that I had to spend and keep up with. That money can't pay for the computers. If you're given the whole allotment and you break it out on what was 50%, 58%, and what was 42%, but they're going to move that money out of Project Code 22. They're not going to have it in Program Intent Code 22, the up to 42% that you can spend on indirect. That's not going to end up in Program Intent Code 22.
Right. So the way I looked at it was, I don't know what's in the budget.
Good. You want to begin that first, and then your budget reports will have a program intent code 22 for CTE. Those should just be clean on what you're showing for the 58%, and then anything else should be somewhere else. Yeah.
We came up with with that suggestion as well, but also a different perspective, which is if your program pathways allows for it, make one of your English teachers teach business English. It's a CTE course. So.
Love it. If it's business English, it's a whole nother conversation because business English is a CTE course. I'll tell you, this actually happened in my district. I ended up working with the English department on a different grant outside of CTE and found them money, and everybody was happy. But, everybody works in a different way with it, but we were able to do a different technology grant completely for them and keep some. They were into the turnitin.com software that allows research papers to be reviewed as authentically written by students and not bought off the internet by somebody else. And anyway, we got that all worked out. But you can take a look at it from a variety of different ways. Just be clear, though, that on your budget reports, if you're audited, and you will be, at some point, the annual audit your district does will take a look at CTE funds. They'll expect the budgets that have the program intent code 22 to reflect purchasing practices that are appropriate for CTE. Scenario 3. Your district initiated a new culinary program prior to your being hired. They committed to culinary, but a budget wasn't developed for it. How are you going to go about coming up with monies for the program, and what steps would you need to take care of that plan? There is someone in this room who was in a similar situation. Is there anyone who wants to talk to this, or we can brainstorm theoretically? If you were in that situation and they expect you to open the culinary program, according to this, there are kids. Okay. Yeah. What would you do?
I would partner with your local community college culinary arts program. You would build credit and then you're done.
Woo! I tell you what, that could work. Alvin Community College down the road from Friendswood had a wonderful program, so that might be a very fast solution. You also might have a family and consumer sciences teacher who is certified to be able to teach some of the programming, but what's the big deal? If you've got a teacher who's going to assume a new prep, what are some of the steps you need to be sure happen before that teacher's ready to make that work for kids? Equipment, supplies, and one other huge piece. Family and consumer science teachers' certification is very broad. When we hired a teacher with that background who is wonderful, we sent her to culinary school. There are professional developments for those teachers in the summer that allow them to focus just on that curriculum. And it gives them lesson plans and all kinds of wonderful options. But equipment and supplies is critical as well. I think if I were in this situation, I would want to spend that school year building toward having kids in it in the fall. Hopefully we're not looking at October in that kind of real life scenario, right? Scenario 4, this is for the back half of the room primarily. Your district has 4 CTE programs: Ag Science, Business Health, and Culinary Arts. Now, of course, we're talking about cluster areas, and these aren't labeled in exactly the terminology of cluster, but go with me on that. The program has 100 students in it total. Most students are in 1-hour classes. The Ag program has a small ag facility to house the animal projects. The total CTE budget for the district, $75,000, not including the teacher salaries. The ag facility is $10,000 in maintenance for utilities and waste removal. The ag program has 3 classes of floral design. What'd you decide on divvying up the funds?
Well, we decided after looking at the back page, that we were going to develop a 2 or 3 year plan to pay for all this, because there was no way that the $75,000 was going to cover all of this in one school year.
We needed to go to the soup and ask for fund balance.
Okay.
Your dentist would probably not cost as much as your ag science. And so all these budgets are typically in place beforehand, and if you took a look and went and broke down by budget, so I can speak that we have 3 of these different programs, and ag science costs at least 5 times more than our business program. So you cannot just say, all right, 4 programs get 1 core 20, they're going to get the 17,000.
You're not going to divide it evenly. You're going to consider the cost, and I loved his comments. They were right on. In this scenario, there won't be as many day-to-day costs associated with delivering business education as there will be in delivering some of the others. So that's a great way to begin. And looking at the budgets that have been expended in the past gives you a sense of how programs have been funded in the past.
In our district, and I don't know how it is in others, but we can't do anything with technology. So the part 2 was the classroom set of computers just for the health science program. We can't do anything with technology without going through the technology department. They want to know it, they want to vet it, because they have to maintain it. It's got to mesh. So all the budget for technology in our district falls with them. So even if we wanted to, I don't think we could do the part 2 piece. But if you have an existing computer lab, then you could work on scheduling that class to go in the lab that you already have versus purchasing a brand new set for them, and that might actually wipe out that whole cost.
And this is a great point, and it illustrates again the differences between districts. In our district, we paid for all of our technology expenses, but we worked with the Department of Technology before we ordered so that they knew we were a Mac-based district and had only Mac computers. But in CTE, we had PCs too, and we had our own people who came in and managed the PC labs because we knew that was going to be outside the scope of our regular technology folks. That's all changed currently, but when I hired on back in the dark ages, that's where we were. So, but you work out working relationships, figure out where your district is, and go from there.
So my thinking on it in the process of developing programs that are going to a new CTE center is the demographics we looked at yesterday with where the high needs, high paying. I would have to factor in all of that and look at what is the labor market supporting. So as far as floral design, what's the labor market supporting in that? Where can we get jobs with that? How much money do we put in that as opposed to another strand? Like in culinary arts, for instance, lots of low-paying jobs. Right, and more, lots of low-paying jobs. So, do we look at how much money do we put into culinary arts? I'm former culinary arts, so I look at that and say how much money are we putting into that, and then what are the benefits from that? So I have to kind of put all those into consideration. Also, how much money do we put into a program that's putting out either high need or high paying jobs?
And that's exactly right. In some cases, you will have followed folks who have very large footsteps to fill, and they will have done all that planning. They'll have considered labor market data, and your programming is well on track. We had a 5-year long-range plan in my district for CTE, and we modified it every year to keep going, so we knew where we were headed, and we could keep our technology current and things like that. But you may very well be somebody who's just starting CTE programming in your district, or you may have followed someone who was not able to be there the full year because of some personal situation or whatever. So you have a variety of different realities in the districts that you serve, and wherever you are, you want to come up with a game plan. Part 3, you've figured out how to divvy up your funds in a way that you feel comfortable with, including and considering the technology aspect of it. And now student travel comes up. How many in the room know what your district's policy is with respect to funding student travel? Raise your hand. Okay, if you don't, I would make a note to determine that when you get back, because districts have quite a wide variance in their attitudes and what they allow for travel and how that can be done. It is permittable to use state funds for CTE student CTSO participation in competitions, but check your district policy as well, because there might be some restraints on that. And if so, if there is a constraint that you deal with in that, there's usually a plan of action for being able to access funding to still support those kids. It may not come through the budget. It may come through the Education Foundation or fundraisers or some other thing. David, what does your district do right now?
On student travel, if it's a local contest, we have Suburbans, and if they need a bus, CTE budget will pay for the bus. A couple of years ago, in 2008, I bought my first Suburban. That was the best thing I ever did, because I don't have, and I knew I did that because our district was going to a $2 a mile charge to use one of their Suburbans. And I knew that, I did the math real quick, and I said, well, if I borrow one of theirs for 15,000 miles, I can buy my own. So it cost me $31,000, and I bought one. And then I bought another one in 2010. I bought another one in 2013. I gave them, transportation department, the 2008 one, and now they don't charge me to use any of their Suburbans because I gave them a Suburban. So it works out pretty good if you work with the people in your local district. We furnish all local travel. We send students to all of the contests, and the CTE budget pays for the travel part of it. And even if it's a national contest, that's my portion that we mentioned the other day. When a student goes to national, the district pays, the central administration pays for hotel and registration. I get them there, and then they do any incidentals such as Disney World, or if they want to rent a car, anything they do at that, or if they want to buy meals, they do that with their, I call it activity.
And every district does have its own take on all that. In Friendswood, the kids paid for their regional or district level competition. We paid for all the state level expenses that related to competition, housing, meals, travel, anything that was for fun the kids came up with on their own or through activity funds. But at the national, anything out of state, that had to come through activity funds in Friendswood ISD. But we had great support there. Yeah? Depends on if it was tied to education curriculum. If it was tied to their curricular area, if it was an engineering program with an engineering group of kids, we would build it in probably as a field trip or an extended curricular kind of thing. It just depends on how it fits in and how it ties in. So you have to give that, yeah. Oh, yeah. You can pay for the buses. If you have a clinical program and send your kids to the hospital, you can pay your travel expenses there. And there's actually a reimbursement your travel director, your transportation director can receive from the state as well. We're wrapping up the budget side of this. Just mentioned in the last scenario, on the ag facility, you certainly can buy pens with CTE funds, of course. And teacher training absolutely can be paid for from the CTE funding. There are professional development conferences in each of the cluster areas, and they're wonderful resources for teachers. So just be aware of that. We went a little over, sorry about that, but I hope you got something out of this. Thanks for your time. There was one question about FTEs that we promised to address. One of the participants asked about principal six-week attendance reports. Those 6-week attendance reports are compiled together at the end of the year to create the total FTE report. So in 6-week intervals, they estimate what your current FTEs are based on the student enrollments and the minutes per day. We had a hurricane that affected our school year, 1 year in Friendswood, and we missed 8 days. I guarantee you that my FTE estimate for that 6 weeks was lower than any of the other reports for the whole year because we were gone. We didn't have kids in classes that day. Now, it turned out those days were waived at the end of the year. But anyway, just bear in mind that that's how the 6-week reports fit into the FTE picture.